As the sun set on the continent of Europe, the encroaching darkness was more than just a transition from day to night. It was a metaphor for a continent slipping into an abyss of terror and despair under the shadow of the Nazi regime. In the heart of this darkness, there existed stories not just of survival against the odds, but of the indomitable human spirit that refused to be extinguished. Among these tales, one stands distinct, a story woven from the threads of faith, mysticism, and an unyielding struggle against an evil that sought to erase not just lives, but the very essence of humanity. This narrative does not dwell in the realm of ghosts and haunted houses, but finds its horror in the reality of human cruelty and its beauty in the resilience of the human soul. Our protagonist is an elderly Jewish mystic. A man who, having lost his family to the unspeakable horrors of the Nazi purge, finds himself entangled in the cruel fate of millions. With nothing left but his faith and the ancient knowledge of Kabbalah passed down through generations, he steps into the heart of darkness, a Nazi concentration camp. This camp, a place where the air is thick with despair and the soil soaked with innocence lost, becomes the unlikely stage for a battle. Not one fought with guns and bombs, but a spiritual warfare waged in the shadows, where the mystic's only weapons are his faith and the secret rituals of his ancestors. In the chapters that follow, we will traverse this bleak landscape through the mystic's eyes. We will see the unimaginable horror of the concentration camp, not to glorify it, but to acknowledge the depth of human suffering and the strength it takes to face it. The mystic, with every ritual he performs and every symbol he draws, does not just fight for survival, but for the preservation of the light in a place where darkness seems endless. As the world outside remains oblivious or powerless to stop the atrocities within the camp's fences, the mystic's journey becomes a beacon of hope for those trapped in the night without end. His story is a testament to the power of faith and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of utter annihilation. This is not a tale for the faint of heart, for it delves into the deepest abyss of human cruelty to find the undying light of hope and resistance. This is the story of Ghosts of the Holocaust, a narrative that seeks to remember the lost and honor the survivors, a reminder of the cost of forgetting the darkness that once fell over Europe. The journey to the concentration camp was a silent procession of despair, a train of the condemned winding its way through Europe scarred by war. The mystic, nestled among his fellow prisoners, sat with a quietude that belied the turmoil within. As the train screeched to a halt, the doors opened not to liberation, but to a deeper captivity, the infamous gates of the concentration camp looming ominously ahead. As they were herded off the train, the mystic's first observation was the pervading sense of hopelessness that hung in the air like a thick fog. The camp was a vast expanse of despair, enclosed by high fences topped with barbed wire, watchtowers overseeing every corner, and guards whose eyes were as cold as the winter frost. The ground was barren, devoid of life, mirroring the void in the hearts of those who entered. The process of registration was a cruel initiation into the camp's regime. Names were replaced with numbers, identities stripped away as easily as the clothes on their backs, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. The mystic, now a number among thousands, felt the weight of imprisonment in his very bones. Yet, amidst the dehumanization, he observed the faces around him, each telling a story of loss, fear, and a flickering flame of resilience. The barracks, which would become their home, were cramped and squalid, designed not for human habitation, but for the warehousing of souls deemed unworthy by the regime. The mystic's bed was a wooden plank shared with two others, the luxury of solitude a forgotten concept here. As night fell on his first day, the cold seeped into the barracks, a physical manifestation of the chill in his heart. The crushing reality of imprisonment was not just in the physical deprivation, but in the erasure of the self. The camp was designed to break spirits, to extinguish hope, and to rewrite narratives until nothing remained but the regime's version of who they were. Expendable, unworthy, subhuman. Yet, in the eyes of the mystic, there flickered a defiance, a refusal to let the darkness consume the light within him. His initial observations revealed a world turned upside down, where cruelty was routine and suffering was the currency of existence. The mystic saw beyond the immediate horror to the challenge that lay before him. To maintain his identity, his faith, and his humanity in a place designed to strip him of all three. As the mystic lay in the darkness, the distant howls of pain and despair echoed through the night. These were not the cries of the defeated, but the battle cries of souls refusing to be silenced. In this realization, the mystic found his purpose. He knew that his survival was not just a physical battle, but a spiritual one. The concentration camp, with its relentless brutality, was the arena where he would wage his war, not just for himself, but for all who suffered alongside him. The mystic's arrival at the concentration camp marked the beginning of a journey fraught with suffering and darkness. Yet, it was also the start of a profound resistance, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of unspeakable evil. Within the confines of the concentration camp, a microcosm of humanity emerged, a tapestry of characters each playing their part in the tragic opera of survival. Among these were individuals who would significantly impact the mystic's journey, embodying the complexities of human nature against the backdrop of unimaginable cruelty. Fellow prisoners. Aaron. A young man who once studied to become a rabbi, Aaron represents the lost generation, his dreams shattered by the war. Despite his youth, his eyes hold a depth of sorrow. Aaron becomes one of the mystic's closest companions, drawn together by a shared faith and the mutual understanding of loss. His skepticism of the mystic's rituals gradually transforms into a deep respect, marking him as a disciple of sorts. Lee. A nurse from Warsaw, Lee embodies resilience and compassion. Even in the camp, she continues to care for the sick and wounded, using whatever meager resources she can find. Lee's kindness serves as a beacon of hope for many, including the mystic. Her pragmatic yet hopeful perspective on life provides a counterbalance to the mystic's spiritual approach to their situation. Ezekiel. Once a celebrated artist, Ezekiel uses scraps of whatever material he can find to create small pieces of art, defying the camp's dehumanizing conditions. His silent resilience and commitment to preserving beauty in a place devoid of it resonate with the mystic. Ezekiel's art becomes a symbol of resistance and a testament to the enduring human spirit. Compassionate guard. Friedrich. A young German soldier drafted into the camp's guard detail. Friedrich's demeanor sets him apart from his fellow guards. Haunted by the atrocities he is forced to partake in, he finds himself questioning the ideology he has been fed. In secret, Friedrich shows small acts of kindness to the prisoners, risking his life in the process. His complex relationship with the mystic underscores the moral dilemmas faced by individuals caught in the machinery of war. Ruthless camp commandant. Commandant Engel. The embodiment of the Nazi regime's cruelty, Commandant Engel oversees the camp with an iron fist. His belief in the Nazi ideology is unshakable, viewing the prisoners as less than human. Engel is a man who takes pleasure in power, employing brutal tactics to maintain order and discipline. His interactions with the mystic are charged with tension, as he views the old man's influence among the prisoners with suspicion. Engel represents the ultimate adversary, not just for the mystic, but for all those who dream of freedom. These key characters form the core around which the story unfolds, each bringing their own unique perspective to the collective struggle for survival. Their interactions with the mystic, whether through friendship, enmity, or the complex gray areas in between, highlight the diverse range of human experiences and emotions that flourish even in the most repressive environments. Through their eyes, the narrative explores themes of hope, resilience, defiance, and the indomitable human spirit's capacity to seek light in the darkest of times. Labor in the camp was backbreaking and relentless. Men and women alike were put to work in fields, factories, or construction sites, their efforts contributing to the war machine that sought to erase their existence. The mystic, despite his age, was not spared. Assigned to a work detail hauling stones for a new barracks, he felt the physical strain on his body, each stone a testament to the futility of their labor. Yet, it was during these long hours of forced labor that the mystic began to perceive his unique role within the camp's walls. He noticed how his presence, his quiet prayers whispered under his breath, offered a semblance of comfort to those around him. Even in the depths of despair, his fellow prisoners sought him out, their whispered conversations a mixture of curiosity and a desperate search for hope. The mystic realized that his knowledge of Kabbalah, the ancient mystical tradition of his ancestors, provided a different kind of sustenance amidst the starvation of body and soul. He started to see the symbols and rituals of Kabbalah not just as spiritual practices, but as tools of resistance against the dehumanization they faced daily. This realization came into sharp focus one evening, as the mystic sat in the dim light of the barracks, tracing the shapes of Hebrew letters in the dirt floor. A young man, Aaron, approached him, his eyes filled with a mixture of skepticism and desperation. "Do you really believe that can help us?" he asked, nodding towards the symbols. The mystic looked up, meeting Aaron's gaze. "It's not about belief," he replied softly. "It's about remembering who we are, preserving that spark within us that they seek to extinguish. In our faith, in our traditions, we find the strength to resist, to survive." From that moment, the mystic's role within the camp crystallized. He became a beacon of hope and a guardian of spirit in a place designed to crush both. His rituals, performed quietly in the shadows of the barracks or the fields, became acts of defiance, small lights in the overwhelming darkness of the camp. The establishment of the camp's brutal routine and the realization of the mystic's unique role marked a turning point. It was a silent declaration that even in the face of unimaginable horror, the human spirit could not be entirely subdued. Through his actions, the mystic began to weave a fragile web of hope, a testament to the power of faith and the resilience of those who clung to it. Long before the shadow of tyranny darkened the streets of Europe, the mystic was known by another name, Rabbi Yitzhak Levin. In a small village nestled amidst the rolling hills of Eastern Europe, he was a respected figure, a shepherd to his flock, guiding them through the trials of life with wisdom and compassion. His life was steeped in the traditions of his ancestors, a tapestry of rituals and teachings that connected him to his faith as deeply as the roots of an ancient tree. Rabbi Levin's journey into the mystical world of Kabbalah began in his youth, sparked by an insatiable curiosity about the mysteries of the universe and the Creator. Under the tutelage of a renowned Kabbalist, he delved into the ancient texts, the Zohar, the Sefer Yetzirah, and others, texts that many feared to approach. His mentor taught him that Kabbalah was not merely a study of the unseen, but a path to understanding the divine presence in every facet of creation, a way to draw closer to God through the sanctification of the mundane. As the years passed, Yitzhak became a master in his own right, his reputation as a mystic growing beyond the confines of his village. Yet, he remained humble, always insisting that he was but a student of the universe, ever learning, ever seeking. His life was not without sorrow. The loss of his beloved wife, Miriam, to illness, and the absence of children to carry on his legacy, were deep wounds to his soul. Yet, he found solace in his studies, in the rhythmic chanting of prayers, and in the community that looked to him for guidance. When the war came, it swept away the life he knew like leaves in a storm. His village was decimated, its inhabitants scattered or killed. Rabbi Levin was captured, his identity as a Jew marking him for death. Yet, even as he was forced into the cattle car that would take him to the concentration camp, he carried with him the sacred texts of Kabbalah, hidden within the lining of his coat. The teachings of Kabbalah, which had once been a source of spiritual exploration, became a lifeline in the camp. Rabbi Levin, now known simply as the mystic among his fellow prisoners, drew upon the deepest teachings of his faith to sustain not only his spirit, but also those of his companions. His practice of Kabbalah in the camp was not the pursuit of mystical experiences for their own sake, but a desperate effort to maintain a connection to something greater than the horror that surrounded them. He used the symbols and rituals as a shield, a way to protect and preserve the spark of divinity within each person, even in the darkest of times. The mystic's background, his life before the camp, was a world apart from the desolation of his present. Yet, it was this foundation, built on faith, knowledge, and an unbreakable connection to the divine, that allowed him to stand as a pillar of light in the overwhelming darkness of the concentration camp. His journey from Rabbi Yitzhak Levin to the mystic was not just a change of name, but a transformation into a beacon of hope, a reminder to all who suffered with him, that even in the greatest darkness, the human spirit could find ways to shine. In the bleakest corners of the concentration camp, where hope seemed but a distant memory, the mystic's rituals remained a well-guarded secret, shielded from the prying eyes of both prisoners and guards. Yet, secrets have a way of coming to light, especially when they carry the faint glimmer of hope. It was during one of the long, arduous work details, as the mystic silently recited a prayer under his breath, that his secret began to unfold before a select few. Aaron, the young man who had once approached the mystic with skepticism, was the first to witness the mystic's subtle, yet profound, practices. He observed the mystic tracing symbols in the dirt with his foot, symbols that were foreign to Aaron's eyes, yet seemed to resonate with a deep, unspoken part of his soul. Intrigued and desperate for any semblance of solace, Aaron approached the mystic once more, this time with a genuine curiosity that broke through his initial disbelief. Lee, the nurse, stumbled upon the mystic's secret during one of the rare moments of respite in the infirmary. She noticed the mystic quietly murmuring blessings over the sick and the injured, his hands hovering just inches above their weary bodies. Though she did not understand the words he spoke, she felt a palpable change in the air, a lightening of the heavy pall that hung over the infirmary. Ezekiel, the artist, whose spirit refused to be crushed by the camp's brutality, found kinship with the mystic through a shared appreciation for the beauty that could still be found amidst horror. He sketched the symbols he saw the mystic draw, recognizing in them a form of art that transcended the physical to touch the divine. In these sketches, Ezekiel saw not just the mystic's secret, but a message of defiance against their captors. As the mystic's secret slowly came to light, a small group of fellow prisoners began to form around him, drawn by a mix of curiosity, desperation, and the faint hope that the mystic's practices could offer them some protection, some solace in their suffering. They approached him cautiously, aware of the risks involved in any deviation from the strictures imposed by their captors. The mystic, understanding the dangers of revealing his practices too openly, chose to share his knowledge with this small, trusted group. He taught them the meanings behind the symbols, the importance of intention in their prayers, and the ways in which their faith could be a source of strength, even in the darkest of times. These teachings were not just lessons in mysticism, they were acts of rebellion, affirmations of their humanity in a place designed to strip them of it. The discovery of the mystic secret by this small group of fellow prisoners marked a turning point in their collective struggle for survival. It forged a bond between them, a silent pact to uphold their faith and their identities in the face of relentless dehumanization. Together, they found a source of inner strength, a way to light a candle in the darkness, guided by the mystic's quiet determination to keep the flame of hope alive. In the grim reality of the concentration camp, skepticism was a survival tool, a way to guard against the crushing disappointment of unfulfilled promises and unrealized hopes. Thus, when whispers of the mystic's secret rituals began to spread among a select few of his fellow prisoners, they were met with a mixture of disbelief and wary curiosity. The very idea that ancient prayers and symbols could provide any measure of protection or solace in their current hell seemed, to many, a cruel jest. Aaron, who had initially approached the mystic with a skepticism born of shattered dreams and a broken spirit, found himself caught between doubt and a desperate longing for something to believe in. Each day, as he watched the mystic move through the camp, a quiet figure of unwavering faith amidst despair, Aaron's skepticism began to erode. The change was gradual, a slow thawing of the ice that had encased his heart as he began to perceive the rituals not as magic, but as acts of defiance, a reclaiming of their stolen humanity. Lee, too, struggled with her initial doubts. Ezekiel, ever the artist, was less burdened by skepticism than by a profound sense of loss. His art had been a refuge, a way to transcend the ugliness of their reality. The mystic's rituals, with their intricate symbols and whispered prayers, appealed to his sense of beauty and mystery. In them, he found a new canvas, a way to merge his art with something ancient and enduring, something that spoke of resilience and the indomitable will to survive. As word of the mystic's practices spread, more prisoners began to gather during the clandestine meetings, held in the shadowed corners of the camp or under the cover of night. Each came bearing their own burdens of skepticism and despair, but also a flickering hope that there might be some truth in the mystic's quiet assurances. The turning point came during a particularly brutal winter, when the combined forces of cold, starvation, and disease threatened to extinguish what little life remained in them. It was then that the mystic introduced them to a simple ritual, a prayer for protection and strength, to be recited together as they huddled for warmth. The effect was not immediate, nor was it miraculous. But in the days that followed, a subtle shift occurred. There was a new light in the eyes of those who participated, a sense of solidarity and shared purpose that had been absent before. Skepticism, while not entirely vanquished, gave way to a growing sense of hope. This hope was not based on the expectation of divine intervention, but on the realization that in their unity, in their refusal to let go of their faith and their humanity, they found a strength they had thought lost. The initial skepticism of the prisoners transformed into a growing sense of hope, not because they believed the mystic's rituals could change their fate, but because, in the very act of coming together, in holding fast to their traditions and their identities, they rediscovered the essence of who they were. In this rediscovery, they found the will to endure, to resist, and to keep the flame of hope alive in the darkest of times. As the war dragged on, its voracious appetite consuming not just the lives of soldiers, but the very soul of Europe, the conditions within the concentration camp deteriorated with alarming speed. The camp, designed as a machine of death, became even more efficient in its cruelty, its gears greased by the suffering of the innocent. Food, already scarce, became even more so. The watery soup and meager scraps of bread that constituted their daily rations reduced further in quantity and frequency. The mystic watched as the bodies of his fellow prisoners became even more gaunt, their faces hollowed out by hunger, their eyes dimmed by the constant specter of starvation. The act of eating, once a communal moment of scant comfort, turned into a silent, desperate struggle, each spoonful a fleeting bulwark against the encroaching shadow of death. The brutality of the guards escalated, their violence no longer just a method of control, but a sport. Beatings became more frequent and more savage, their reasons more arbitrary. The mystic bore witness to the suffering of his companions, their bodies and spirits battered by an unending torrent of cruelty. He offered what solace he could, his prayers a soft counterpoint to the cries of pain that filled the air. Disease spread with rampant ease through the overcrowded barracks, the sick quickly outnumbering the healthy. The infirmary, overseen by Lee, became a place of despair, the limited supplies and medicine, unable to stem the tide of illness that swept through the camp. The mystic visited often, his presence a comfort to both the patients and Lee, who fought a losing battle against the inevitable. Winter brought its own horrors, the cold, an unrelenting force that sapped the warmth from their bodies and the hope from their hearts. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes, the chill air made every breath a pain, and the thin blankets provided little protection against the freezing nights. The mystic, his own body racked by the cold, continued his rituals, his breath forming frosty symbols in the air as he prayed for strength, for warmth, for survival. As the war continued, its end seemingly as distant as the stars above, despair began to take root even in the hearts of those who had clung to hope. The mystic felt the weight of this despair, saw it in the faces of Aaron, Lee, Ezekiel, and the others who looked to him for guidance. It was a weight that threatened to crush him, to extinguish the light he had fought so hard to maintain. Yet, even as the conditions in the camp worsened, the mystic found his resolve hardening. The suffering around him, rather than breaking his spirit, steeled it. He understood, with a clarity that pierced the gloom, that his role was more crucial than ever. In a world where darkness seemed to have won, where the light of humanity was dimmed to a flicker, his rituals, his prayers, and his presence became a beacon. The worsening conditions in the camp, rather than dampening the mystic's resolve, only intensified his commitment to his fellow prisoners. In the face of overwhelming despair, he stood as a pillar of strength, a reminder that even in the deepest gloom, hope could still be found, that faith could still provide shelter, and that the human spirit, no matter how tested, could endure. As the bleak winter gave way to a spring that brought no respite from the camp's horrors, the mystic deepened his resolve to use his ancient knowledge for the sake of his fellow sufferers. With conditions worsening and the shadow of death looming ever larger, he recognized that the battle they fought was not just for physical survival, but for the preservation of their inner light, their souls, their humanity, their connection to something greater than the sum of their suffering. In the quiet of the night, when the only sounds were the soft moans of the restless and the distant barking of guards' dogs, the mystic began to perform discreet rituals designed to offer solace and protection. These rituals were not grandiose acts of defiance visible to all, rather, they were subtle, imbued with a deep resonant power of faith and the mystic's profound connection to the traditions of Kabbalah. He chose symbols with care, drawing them in the dirt of the compound or tracing them in the air with his fingers, each one selected for its specific protective qualities. He whispered prayers that had been passed down through generations, their words a balm to the wounded spirits of those who gathered around him, a small circle of trust that had begun to form in the heart of despair. The mystic's rituals were not intended to summon miracles. He held no illusions about the power of his actions to alter the brutal reality of their existence. Instead, these rituals served as a reminder to the prisoners that they were not forgotten by the world, that their suffering was witnessed by a higher power, and that their spirits were still their own, inviolable and sacred. To Aaron, Lee, Ezekiel, and the others who had come to understand the depth of the mystic's commitment, these rituals became a source of strength. In the mystic's quiet determination, they found a model of resilience. The symbols he drew, the prayers he whispered, were not just acts of spiritual significance, they were acts of rebellion against a regime that sought to strip them of their identity and humanity. The mystic also began to teach those willing to learn the meanings behind the symbols, the importance of intention in their prayers, and how to find moments of peace and solace in the rituals they performed together. These teachings, passed in hushed tones and shared glances, became a secret language of resistance among the prisoners, a way to communicate hope and solidarity in a place designed to isolate and destroy. As news of the mystic's ritual spread, albeit cautiously to avoid detection by the guards, more came to seek his guidance, drawn by the promise of a moment's peace in a tumultuous world. The mystic welcomed them all, his heart heavy with the knowledge of their suffering, but buoyed by the growing sense of community and shared purpose. The impact of the mystic's actions, though intangible, was profound. In the face of overwhelming darkness, he had kindled a flame of hope and defiance that flickered in the hearts of those he touched. His rituals, a blend of ancient wisdom and unwavering faith, became a beacon of light in the concentration camp, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to seek solace and protection even in the darkest of times. In the microcosm of the concentration camp, where each day was a battle for survival, the emergence of the mystic as a beacon of hope was not without its complications. As whispers of his rituals and teachings spread through the barracks, a division began to form among the prisoners. On one side were those who saw in the mystic's actions a source of strength and solace, a means to preserve their humanity in the face of relentless dehumanization. On the other side were skeptics, those who viewed the mystics' practices as folly, a dangerous distraction from the grim realities of their existence. The skeptics were not without reason in their concerns. The camp was a place where hope could be a double-edged sword. Previous experiences of dashed hopes had taught them the hard lesson that survival often depended on facing the brutal truth of their situation, without the comfort of illusions. They argued that belief in the mystic's ability to offer any real protection through his rituals was a form of self-deception, a refusal to accept the hopelessness of their plight. Among the skeptics was a man named Tomas, a former university professor who had once believed in the power of reason above all. Tomas saw the mystic's influence as a regression into superstition, a denial of the rational thinking he held so dear. He voiced his concerns openly, sparking heated debates among the prisoners. Hope is precious, he would argue, but let us not place it in the hands of fantasies. The tension between the believers and the skeptics grew as conditions in the camp worsened. Incidents of conflict arose, with arguments breaking out over the validity of the mystics' practices. The camp's oppressive atmosphere only served to amplify these tensions, turning minor disagreements into major divisions. Aaron, once a skeptic himself, became one of the mystics' staunchest defenders. He argued that the rituals and prayers were not about denying the reality of their situation, but about facing it with a spirit strengthened by faith and unity. What harm is there, he would ask, in finding comfort in our traditions, in maintaining a bond with our heritage and our God, even in this place of despair? Lee, too, found herself caught in the middle. As a nurse, she understood the importance of tangible actions in saving lives. Yet, she also witnessed the intangible benefits of the mystics' rituals on the spirits of those she cared for. She advocated for a middle path, where faith in the mystics' practices could coexist with practical efforts to survive. The rift within the prisoner community reflected the broader struggle for survival in the camp. On one level, it was a battle against the physical conditions of starvation, disease, and brutality. On another, it was a struggle for the soul, a fight to maintain a sense of self and purpose in a place designed to strip away all sense of identity and hope. As tensions rose, the mystic himself remained a figure of calm amidst the storm. He did not seek to silence the skeptics, nor did he claim to offer salvation. Instead, he continued his rituals and teachings with a quiet determination, understanding that faith was a personal journey, one that each prisoner had to navigate in their own way. His role, as he saw it, was not to convince or convert, but to offer a light to those who chose to follow it, and to respect the choices of those who did not. In this way, the mystics sought to bridge the divide, to heal the rifts with compassion and understanding, and to remind everyone in the camp that their true enemy lay beyond the barracks, in the ideology and actions of their captors. Within the barbed wire confines of the concentration camp, a place already steeped in unimaginable horror, the mystic began to perceive a shift in the atmosphere that transcended the physical deprivations and brutalities inflicted upon its inhabitants. It was as if the cumulative weight of suffering, despair, and death had begun to tear at the very fabric of reality, inviting a deeper darkness into the world, one that fed on the pain and fear of the imprisoned souls. This darkness was not just the absence of light or the embodiment of the camp's physical horrors, it was something more sinister, a palpable presence that seemed to lurk in the shadows, watching, waiting. The mystic felt it most acutely during the night, when the cries of the suffering were the loudest, and the veil between the material and the spiritual grew thin. His senses heightened by years of mystical practice, the mystic understood that what he was feeling was not a figment of his imagination, nor was it merely the psychological toll of the relentless brutality they faced daily. It was something else, a form of evil that thrived on the desecration of life and spirit, an entity or entities, drawn to the camp by the sheer scale of human tragedy unfolding within its fences. The realization that they were battling not just their human captors, but also this deeper darkness, was a heavy burden to bear. The mystic knew that to confront this presence, he would need to delve deeper into his spiritual arsenal, to use rituals and prayers not just for solace and protection, but as weapons in a more metaphysical conflict. He began to adapt his rituals, incorporating elements designed specifically to combat this darkness. These were not aggressive acts but protective ones, aimed at shielding the camp and its inhabitants from the spiritual malice that sought to crush what little hope and resistance remained in their hearts. He focused on creating sanctuaries of light, however faint, within the camp, areas where the presence of the divine was invoked so strongly that the darkness could not penetrate. To do this, the mystic drew upon the most sacred aspects of Kabbalah, invoking the names of God in a way that was both a plea for intervention and a declaration of defiance against the forces that sought to extinguish their light. He taught those who were willing to participate in these rituals how to guard their spirits against despair, how to anchor themselves to their faith, their identity, and to each other, forming a network of light in the darkness. The mystic's efforts did not go unnoticed. Among the prisoners, there were those who felt a shift, a subtle lifting of the oppressive atmosphere, a sense of being watched over and protected. These moments were fleeting, easily drowned out by the next wave of suffering, but they were real, sparks of light in the deepest darkness. Yet, this spiritual battle took its toll on the mystic. The energy required to maintain these sanctuaries of light, to constantly push back against the darkness, was immense. He grew more gaunt, his eyes reflecting the weight of his dual battles, one against the physical conditions of the camp, and the other against the spiritual forces that sought to use it as a breeding ground for despair. The mystic's actions became a beacon of hope for some, a source of strength in their continued struggle for survival. To others, it was a confirmation of his deep connection to the spiritual world, proof that even in the most hellish conditions, the human spirit could fight back against the darkness, both seen and unseen. His battle, though largely invisible, was no less significant than the more visible struggles for survival that played out daily within the camp's fences. It was a testament to the power of faith and the unbreakable will of those who refused to surrender their light, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. As the mystic's perception of the encroaching darkness intensified, he resolved to confront this unseen adversary with a directness and intensity he had not previously employed. The battleground for this spiritual warfare was the very air of the concentration camp, a place already thick with despair and suffering. The mystic chose to focus his efforts on the barracks, the heart of daily life for the prisoners, where the weight of the darkness was felt most acutely. Understanding the magnitude of the task before him, the mystic began to prepare for a ritual of protection unlike any he had performed before. This was not merely a prayer or whispered blessing, but a complex ceremony that drew upon the deepest wells of his spiritual knowledge. He planned to create a protective aura around the barracks, a shield woven from ancient symbols and rituals that could repel the darkness, providing a sanctuary of light and peace for those within. To begin, the mystic gathered a small group of trusted followers, those who had shown a deep respect for his teachings and an understanding of the stakes involved. Under the cover of night, when the eyes of the guards were least upon them, they met in the shadow of the barracks. The mystic had collected bits of charcoal and scraps of cloth during the preceding days, materials he would use to draw the ancient symbols of protection and unity on the walls of the barracks. With solemn gravity, he instructed his followers on the significance of each symbol, imparting to them the knowledge that these were not mere drawings but visual prayers, each line and curve a plea to the divine for protection and strength. The most sacred of these symbols was the Shield of David, known for its powerful protective properties. He drew this symbol at the entrance of the barracks, a guardian at the threshold. The mystic then led his followers in a series of prayers and chants, their voices rising in a harmonious plea to the heavens. The words were drawn from the deepest traditions of Kabbalah, invoking the names of God in a sequence that had been used for centuries to ward off evil and invite divine presence. As they chanted, the mystic moved through the barracks, tracing symbols on the walls, the floors, and even the undersides of the bunk beds. Each symbol served as a node in a larger network, a web of spiritual protection that would envelop the space. The culmination of the ritual came when the mystic, surrounded by his followers, stood in the center of the barracks and raised his hands to the heavens. He called upon the divine light to fill the space, to cast out the darkness that had settled like a shroud over their hearts and minds. The intensity of his prayer, the depth of his faith, seemed to charge the air around them, the ancient words vibrating with a power that transcended their dire circumstances. When the ritual was complete, the atmosphere in the barracks felt palpably different. A sense of peace, fragile yet distinctly present, hung in the air. The prisoners, even those who had not participated in the ritual, felt a lightness they had not known for months. The oppressive weight of the camp's atmosphere had been lifted, if only within the confines of their barracks. The mystic knew that this protective aura was not impenetrable. The physical horrors of the camp, the cruelty of the guards, and the ever-present specter of death were realities no ritual could erase. Yet, in creating this sanctuary of light, he had provided a spiritual refuge, a place where the prisoners could draw breath, gather strength, and remember that within them burned a light no darkness could extinguish. This act of resistance, performed in the heart of darkness, was a testament to the mystic's deep faith and his unyielding commitment to the welfare of his fellow prisoners. The mystic, with his quiet demeanor and the respect he commanded among the prisoners, had long been a subject of the commandant's wary observations. However, it was the mystic's recent activities, the subtle shift in the atmosphere of the barracks, and the gathering of prisoners around him, that finally sparked the commandant's suspicion into action. One cold morning, as the prisoners assembled for the daily roll call, the commandant summoned the mystic to his office, a place where few prisoners entered and even fewer emerged unscathed. The air was thick with tension as the mystic, escorted by 2 guards, made his way across the camp. His fellow prisoners watched in silence, understanding the gravity of the summons and fearing for the mystic's safety. Inside the stark, dimly lit office, the commandant sat behind a large desk, his uniform immaculate, his eyes cold and calculating. He gestured for the mystic to sit, a courtesy that belied the danger of the moment. "I have been hearing interesting rumors about you," the commandant began, his voice smooth and menacing. "They say you have been performing rituals, offering false hope to the prisoners. They say you have become a, how shall I put it, a beacon of resistance." The mystic met the commandant's gaze, his own eyes calm and unyielding. "I offer only comfort and faith to those who suffer," he replied, his voice steady. "If hope is a form of resistance, then it is against despair, not against the rules of this camp." The commandant leaned forward, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Do not play the fool with me. I know what you are doing. You are undermining my authority, creating divisions among the prisoners. You are a threat that must be dealt with." Despite the danger, the mystic remained composed. "I seek only to help my fellow prisoners endure their suffering. If you see this as a threat, then it is not I who am at fault, but the fear that drives you to see enemies where there are none." The commandant's smile faded, replaced by a look of fury. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Be very careful, mystic. I will be watching you closely. Any further evidence of your activities, and I will ensure you regret it." The mystic nodded, understanding the unspoken threat behind the commandant's words. As he was escorted back to the barracks, he knew that the confrontation had marked a turning point. The commandant's suspicion had been aroused, and the safety of those he sought to protect was now in greater jeopardy than ever. Yet, the mystic also knew that he could not allow fear to dictate his actions. The spiritual battle he waged, the light he sought to foster among the prisoners, was more important than ever. The confrontation with the commandant had not weakened his resolve, but it instead reinforced his commitment to stand as a beacon of hope and defiance in the face of darkness. As word of the confrontation spread among the prisoners, it only served to increase their admiration and respect for the mystic. They understood the risks he had taken on their behalf, and his courage in the face of the commandant's threats became yet another source of inspiration. In the mystic's unwavering stance, they saw not just a spiritual leader, but a symbol of their own ability to resist the dehumanization of the camp, to maintain their dignity and faith against all odds. In the shadowed corridors and bleak expanses of the concentration camp, where hope was a rare and fleeting commodity, the mystic's confrontation with the commandant became the spark that ignited a quiet revolution of the spirit. The prisoners, who had long been subdued by the relentless crush of cruelty and despair, found in the mystic's bold stance a symbol of resistance that transcended the physical barriers of their confinement. The mystic's efforts, once confined to whispered rituals and small gatherings under the cloak of night, began to ripple through the camp with newfound intensity. His name, once known only to a select few, was now spoken openly among the prisoners, his actions debated in the breadlines, and his teachings shared in the cramped quarters of the barracks. The mystic became an emblem of defiance, not through calls to overt rebellion, but through the far more subversive act of instilling hope. In a place designed to strip its inhabitants of their humanity, he reminded them of their identity, of their worth, and of the light that no darkness could completely extinguish. Prisoners who had never spoken to the mystic, who had never witnessed his rituals or heard his prayers, found themselves drawn to the strength of his conviction. They began to look out for one another with greater care, sharing their meager rations, offering words of comfort, and protecting the weak from the brutality of the guards whenever possible. The mystic's influence fostered a sense of community and solidarity that had been eroded by the camp's oppressive regime. Even those who had remained skeptical of the mystic's spiritual practices could not deny the change in the camp's atmosphere. The aura of fear and despair that had once seemed insurmountable was now punctuated by moments of grace and connection. The mystic's teachings, though rooted in ancient traditions, spoke to the universal desire for freedom, dignity, and the preservation of self in the face of annihilation. As the mystic's story spread beyond the confines of his own barracks, it began to reach even the most hardened and hopeless of prisoners. Tales of his courage in the face of the commandant's threats, of his unwavering commitment to their collective spirit, served as a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. His message was clear. Even in the depths of human cruelty, there was power in unity, in faith, and in the relentless pursuit of light. The commandant and his officers, aware of the growing reverence for the mystic among the prisoners, found themselves grappling with an adversary they could not easily control. The mystic's influence, intangible and diffuse, was immune to the usual tactics of suppression and violence. In their attempts to quell his impact, they only served to amplify his message, confirming his significance as a symbol of resistance and hope. In the end, the mystic's greatest achievement was not any single act of defiance, nor any one ritual or prayer, but the awakening of a collective strength among the prisoners. He had ignited a flame of hope that could not be extinguished, a flame that burned all the brighter against the backdrop of the camp's horrors. In the face of overwhelming darkness, the mystic had shown that the human spirit, united in purpose and faith, was an indomitable force, a beacon of light guiding the way through the night. In the relentless cycle of suffering that defined life in the concentration camp, the arrival of a Jewish holiday, once a time for joyous celebration and communal gathering, loomed as a poignant reminder of all that had been lost. Yet, for the mystic and those drawn to his quiet strength, it also presented a rare opportunity to reaffirm their identity and resilience, to kindle a spark of hope and unity in the depths of despair. The holiday was Passover, the festival of liberation, commemorating the ancient Hebrews' exodus from slavery in Egypt. The irony of celebrating freedom within the confines of a concentration camp was not lost on the prisoners. Yet, it was this very irony that lent the observance a profound significance. It became not just a ritual of remembrance, but a defiant assertion of their enduring spirit, a testament to the belief that tyranny would not prevail forever. Planning the celebration required both courage and ingenuity. The mystic, together with a small circle of trusted followers, including Aaron, Lee, and Ezekiel, began to gather what few resources they could. Matzo, the unleavened bread traditionally eaten during Passover, was impossible to obtain, so they decided to use scraps of bread saved from their meager rations, imbuing these with the symbolic significance of matzo. For wine, they used beetroot stolen from the kitchen, crushed and fermented in secret. The most challenging aspect was finding a place to hold the seder, the ritual feast. It needed to be hidden from the guards' prying eyes, yet large enough to accommodate those who wished to participate. After much deliberation, they chose a secluded corner of the barracks, shielded by a makeshift partition of blankets and clothing. As the day of the celebration approached, the air among the participating prisoners was charged with a mix of nervous anticipation and solemnity. They understood the risks involved, yet the need to connect with their heritage, to assert their identity in the face of relentless dehumanization, outweighed the fear of punishment. Aaron, Lee, Ezekiel, and the others participated with a fervor born of defiance and faith. They shared the matzo and wine, the humblest of repasts, yet rich with symbolic meaning. They sang songs of freedom and hope, their voices low but unwavering, a chorus of resilience in the face of oppression. For a few precious hours, the horrors of the camp receded into the background, replaced by a sense of community and shared purpose. The Seder became more than a religious observance, it was a declaration of their unbroken spirit, a collective affirmation that even in the darkest night, the light of freedom, faith, and human dignity could never be extinguished. As the celebration concluded and the participants dispersed, the impact of their clandestine gathering lingered. They returned to the grim reality of their existence, fortified by the knowledge that they were part of a story that stretched back generations, a story of survival against all odds. In the act of remembering and observing, they had not only honored their ancestors, but it also reinforced their own sense of identity and resilience, a beacon of light guiding them through the darkness. In the depths of the concentration camp's despair, where each day unfolded like a monotonous dirge of suffering, the mystic's role as a beacon of hope and spiritual resilience took on a new dimension. His deep, unwavering connection to the ancient traditions and his profound spiritual insight began to manifest in a series of visions that promised an end to their torment, a liberation not just of the body, but of the spirit. These visions came to the mystic in the quiet of the night, when the camp was shrouded in silence, save for the distant howls of the wind. They were vivid and profound, filled with symbols and messages that transcended the immediate horrors of their situation. In these visions, the mystic saw the camp's gates thrown open, not by the hands of their captors, but by a greater force, a divine intervention that swept through the camp like a cleansing fire, eradicating the darkness that had taken root. He saw the prisoners, including Aaron, Lee, Ezekiel, and all those who had gathered around him in the darkest times, walking out of the camp with their heads held high. They were not broken, but triumphant, their spirits glowing with an inner light that no suffering could dim. The ground beneath their feet bloomed with flowers, a symbol of rebirth and renewal, transforming the landscape of despair into a garden of hope. The mystic shared these visions with his closest followers, his words imbued with a conviction that lent them a palpable sense of reality. "The darkness that surrounds us is but a shadow," he would say, "and like all shadows, it will flee before the light. Our liberation is assured, not by the might of armies, but by the unbreakable strength of our faith and the bonds that unite us." To the weary and the downtrodden, the mystic's visions offered a balm for their bruised souls. His words were not mere platitudes, but a powerful affirmation of their deepest hopes and dreams. In the mystic's visions, they found a source of strength to endure, a reason to believe in a future beyond the barbed wire and watchtowers. For some, the mystic's assurances of liberation seemed like the fantasies of a man pushed to the brink by suffering. Yet, even the most skeptical among them could not deny the transformative effect of his words. The mystic's visions became a topic of whispered conversations throughout the camp, a secret narrative that ran counter to the official story of their inevitable demise. As the days passed, the mystic's visions began to permeate the collective consciousness of the camp, igniting a flame of collective hope that no amount of brutality could extinguish. His followers began to view their daily struggles through a different lens, seeing themselves not as victims of an unending tragedy, but as participants in a story that would ultimately end in triumph. The promise of liberation, as foreseen by the mystic, became a guiding star for the prisoners, a reminder that the darkness was not all-encompassing, that light would return. It reinforced their sense of identity and resilience, reminding them that they were part of a larger narrative, one that had endured through centuries of persecution, and would continue long after the gates of the camp were thrown open. The mystic's visions of liberation did not negate the reality of their suffering, nor did they offer an escape from the daily horrors of camp life. Instead, they provided a spiritual framework within which to endure those horrors, a way to preserve their inner selves against the forces that sought to destroy them. In the mystic's promise of an end to their suffering, the prisoners found not just hope for the future, but a renewed determination to survive the present, to bear witness, and to emerge from the darkness with their humanity intact. As the tide of war turned against the Axis powers and the Allied forces began their inexorable push towards victory, the atmosphere within the concentration camp grew even more tense and volatile. The Nazis, sensing the impending collapse of their regime and fueled by a desperate need to maintain control and secrecy, increased their brutality towards the prisoners. The commandant and his officers, once content with the systematic dehumanization and exploitation of their captives, now resorted to even more extreme measures. The slightest infraction, real or imagined, was met with swift and merciless punishment. Executions, once carried out in relative secrecy, became more frequent in public, a grisly spectacle intended to terrorize the prisoners into submission. Work details, already grueling, were extended for longer hours with even less sustenance provided. The prisoners, weakened by years of malnutrition and abuse, found it increasingly difficult to meet the demands placed upon them. Those who collapsed from exhaustion were often left where they fell, their fate a stark reminder of the camp's merciless regime. The Nazis also began a systematic effort to erase the evidence of their atrocities. Documents were destroyed, and there were rumors of mass graves being exhumed and the bodies burned to hide the extent of the mass executions. This frenzied attempt to cover their tracks only added to the chaos and despair within the camp, as the prisoners were forced to participate in the erasure of their own suffering. Amidst this increased brutality, the mystic and his followers found themselves in an even more precarious position. The commandant, driven by paranoia and the fear of retribution, viewed any form of unity or hope among the prisoners as a direct threat to his authority. The clandestine gatherings and the shared rituals that had provided so much solace and strength to the prisoners were now fraught with danger. Any discovered act of defiance met with brutal retribution. Yet, even as the darkness deepened, the mystic's resolve remained unbroken. His visions of liberation and the promise of an end to their suffering became more vital than ever. He continued to minister to the spirits of his fellow prisoners, his presence a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. The increasing brutality of the Nazis, rather than crushing the spirit of the prisoners, only served to strengthen their resolve. The mystic's teachings, the stories of his visions, became a lifeline for many, a source of strength that sustained them through the darkest days of the camp's existence. They understood that the desperation of their captors was a sign that the end was near, that the Allies' advance heralded not just the defeat of the Nazi regime, but the possibility of their own survival and liberation. In the face of the Nazis' final, frenzied campaign of violence and destruction, the mystic and his followers clung to their faith and to each other with renewed determination. They had endured the unimaginable, and now, as the world outside the camp's walls closed in on their oppressors, they dared to hope for the dawn of a new day, for the fulfillment of the mystic's visions of liberation, and the promise of a future free from the shadow of tyranny. As the Allied forces pressed closer, the tension within the camp reached a fever pitch. The Nazis, in their desperation, became unpredictable, capable of unthinkable brutality. It was in this atmosphere of fear and anticipation that the mystic sensed an impending crisis, a moment of great danger not just to himself, but to all the prisoners he had come to see as his extended family. The mystic understood that to protect his companions through whatever trials lay ahead, he would need to perform one final powerful ritual. This would not be a ritual of hope or solace but one of protection, a spiritual shield to guard the spirits of his fellow prisoners during the camp's most perilous hour. Under the cover of night, in the seclusion of the barracks that had become their sanctuary, the mystic gathered his closest followers. With the air heavy with anticipation, he explained the nature of the ritual. It would draw upon the collective strength and faith of all who participated, channeling their combined willpower into a protective aura that would surround them. Using the last of the materials he had carefully preserved for this moment, a candle stub, a piece of charcoal, and a fragment of cloth, he began to prepare. On the cloth, he drew symbols of protection, each stroke deliberate, charged with the intention to shield and preserve. The candle was lit, its flame a solitary beacon in the darkness, representing the light of their collective spirit. As his followers watched, the mystic recited prayers from the depths of his being, his voice steady and strong. These were not the prayers of one man but of an entire community, a plea for safety and endurance. He called upon the ancient forces of protection, invoking the sacred names that had guarded his people through centuries of persecution and trial. Then, he invited his followers to join him, to link hands and form a circle around the symbols of their faith. As they did so, he led them in a chant, a vibration of sound that filled the space, resonating in the very bones of the barracks. This was their collective will made manifest, a declaration that they stood together, united against the darkness. The ritual reached its climax as the mystic poured all of his spiritual energy into the final invocation, a powerful plea for protection. The candle's flame flickered and then burned brighter, a sign that their plea had been heard. A sense of calm enveloped the group, an intangible shield of peace and strength that wrapped around them, fortifying their spirits. When the ritual was complete, the mystic was visibly weakened, the toll of the ceremony evident in his pallor and the tremor in his hands. Yet, his eyes shone with an inner light, reflecting the depth of his commitment and the strength of his faith. In the days that followed, as the camp faced its final chaotic throes, the mystic's ritual proved to be their unseen armor. Despite the increased violence and the shadow of death that loomed over them, the group found themselves untouched by the worst of the atrocities. It was as if they moved in a bubble of grace, their spirits shielded by the mystic's last great act of spiritual defiance. This final ritual was the culmination of the mystic's journey, a testament to the power of faith and the unbreakable bonds of a community united in the face of darkness. It was a beacon of light not just for those who participated, but for all who would come to hear of it, a story of courage and spiritual resilience that would endure long after the walls of the camp had crumbled into dust. In the aftermath of the ritual that had drawn together the spirits of the prisoners, imbuing them with a protective aura in the face of impending danger, the mystic strength began to wane. The energy required for such a profound spiritual undertaking had been immense, and he had poured into it not just the depth of his faith, but the very essence of his life force. It was a sacrifice made willingly, born of a deep commitment to the well-being of those he had come to regard as his family, within the harsh confines of the camp. In the days that followed, as the sounds of liberation grew louder and the desperation of their captors turned to chaos, the mystic became a figure of quiet resolve, his presence among the prisoners like a steady flame that flickered but did not extinguish. He continued to offer words of comfort and guidance, though his physical form grew increasingly frail, a testament to the price he had paid for their protection. His followers, particularly Aaron, Lee, and Ezekiel, watched over him with a mixture of reverence and deep concern. They understood the magnitude of what he had done for them, the depth of his sacrifice. The mystic, however, remained focused on the future, on the promise of liberation and the rebirth it would bring. "My journey here is almost at an end," he would say, his voice soft but unwavering, "but yours is just beginning. Remember what we have endured, what we have learned. Carry it forward, into the light of a new day." As the final battle for the camp drew near, the mystic gathered his followers for one last time. With the last of his energy, he spoke to them of resilience, of the importance of maintaining their faith and their humanity in the face of any future adversities. "Do not see my passing as an end," he implored, "but as part of the continuum of our existence. We are all links in a chain that stretches back through time and forward into the future. Each of us has a role to play, a purpose that transcends our individual lives." When the liberators finally broke through the gates of the camp, what they found was a scene of both horror and miraculous survival. Among the survivors was a group of prisoners whose spirits seemed untouched by the darkness that had enveloped the camp. At the heart of this group was the mystic, his body now at rest, a peaceful expression on his face that belied the suffering he had endured. The mystic's ultimate sacrifice, the giving of the last of his energy to ensure the survival of others, became a legend among the survivors of the camp. They spoke of how his spirit had guided and protected them, of the rituals that had bound them together in the darkest of times, and of the final powerful ceremony that had shielded them from harm in the camp's last chaotic days. His legacy lived on, not just in the stories that were told, but in the lives of those he had saved. They carried forward the lessons he had taught them, the importance of faith, of unity, and of the enduring power of the human spirit. The mystic had shown them that even in the greatest darkness, light could be found and nurtured, a message that resonated with all who heard it, a beacon of hope for a world emerging from the shadow of war. The long-awaited day began like any other in the concentration camp, with the cold light of dawn filtering through the barbed wire, illuminating a world of despair. Yet, on this day, the air was charged with a palpable sense of anticipation, a whisper of change carried on the wind. For weeks, the distant rumble of artillery had grown ever closer, a harbinger of the approaching storm that would sweep away the darkness. And then, suddenly, the unimaginable became reality. The Allied forces arrived, and the gates of the concentration camp were thrown open, not to unleash more horror, but to herald the end of the prisoners' long nightmare. The liberators were met with scenes that defied belief, a testament to the depths of human cruelty. Emaciated figures, mere shadows of people, emerged tentatively from the barracks, their eyes blinking against the light, uncomprehending. The ground was littered with the fallen, those for whom liberation had come too late. Yet, amidst the desolation, there was a palpable sense of relief, a collective exhalation of breath held too long in the grip of fear. For the survivors, the presence of the Allied soldiers was like a dream from which they feared to awake. They were greeted not with shouts of triumph, but with solemn faces, the liberators bearing witness to the atrocities that had been committed within the camp's confines. The soldiers moved quickly to provide aid, their efficiency a stark contrast to the chaos of the camp. Medics tended to the sick and the injured, while soldiers distributed food and blankets, their actions speaking volumes in the absence of words. Among the survivors was the mystic circle of followers, the group that had been bound together by their shared faith and the rituals that had sustained them through the darkest times. They moved through the camp like specters, their spirits buoyed by the realization of their freedom, yet weighed down by the memory of those who could not share in this moment of liberation. As the news of their liberation spread, a spontaneous gathering formed in the center of the camp. Survivors, liberators, and witnesses to history stood together, a motley assembly united by the shared experience of this momentous day. There were tears and embraces, expressions of gratitude that transcended language barriers, and shared looks of understanding that needed no words. The arrival of the Allied forces and the liberation of the camp marked the end of a long night of suffering. For the survivors, it was not just a return of their physical freedom, but the beginning of a long journey towards healing and reconciliation. The scars of their experience would remain, indelible marks on their souls, but they now faced the future with a sense of hope, knowing that the worst was behind them. The mystic, though he did not live to see the day of liberation, was remembered in the prayers and the stories of those he had helped to survive. In the days that followed, as the survivors began the slow process of reclaiming their lives, his teachings and his sacrifice served as a guiding light, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable evil. The liberation of the camp was not just a military victory, it was a triumph of humanity over barbarism, a reaffirmation of the principles of freedom and dignity for all. It was a moment that would be seared into the collective memory of humanity, a stark reminder of the depths to which it is possible to sink, and the heights of courage and compassion to which it is possible to rise. The liberation of the concentration camp by Allied forces marked the end of a long, dark chapter in the lives of the survivors. As they stepped beyond the confines of the camp into the light of day, their initial feelings of joy and relief were soon intermingled with a profound sense of sorrow and the overwhelming reality of their newfound freedom. This moment, which they had dreamed of through countless nights of suffering, was as complex and multifaceted as the emotions that surged through them. Joy was the first, most immediate emotion, erupting in spontaneous outbursts of tears and embraces among the survivors. They were alive, they had endured the unendurable and emerged on the other side. This joy, however, was tinged with a deep, pervasive sadness. The freedom they now experienced was shadowed by the memory of those who had not survived to see this day. Each survivor carried within them a list of names, faces of friends, family, and comrades whose absence was a gaping wound in their hearts. The realization that they were gone, that the liberation had come too late for so many, cast a pall over the survivors' initial joy. Mixed with joy and sorrow was a profound sense of disorientation, the overwhelming reality of their freedom. For so long, the survivors' lives had been defined by the rigid, brutal structure of the camp. Every moment had been dictated by the whims of their captors, every aspect of their existence reduced to a struggle for survival. Now, suddenly, that structure was gone, replaced by an open horizon that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The question of what now loomed large, a daunting uncertainty about the future and their place in a world that had allowed such horrors to occur. The survivors also grappled with feelings of guilt, a survivor's guilt that weighed heavily on their spirits. Why had they survived when so many others had not? Did they deserve this freedom, and what were they to do with it? This guilt was a heavy burden, complicating their joy and deepening their sorrow. Yet, amid these turbulent emotions, there was also a burgeoning sense of hope. The liberation was not just an end but a beginning, the first step on a long journey towards healing and rebuilding. The survivors, bonded by their shared experiences, looked to each other for support and understanding. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, that the scars they carried would never fully heal, but they also knew they would not have to walk that road alone. The reality of their freedom was multifaceted, a complex tapestry of emotions that defied simple categorization. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, but also a moment of profound grief, a time to mourn all that had been lost. As the survivors stepped forward into the uncertain future, they carried with them the memories of the past, the joy and the sorrow, the darkness and the light. They understood that their freedom was not just a liberation from physical bondage, but a commitment to live, to remember, and to bear witness to the truth of their experiences. As the Allied forces advanced, liberating concentration camps and uncovering the ghastly realities hidden within, the world was confronted with the full extent of the Nazi atrocities. The liberation of these camps did not just mark the end of a dark chapter for the survivors, but also began a period of reckoning for humanity as a whole. The collective horror that greeted the revelations was profound, shaking the foundations of modern civilization and challenging the very notions of humanity and morality. Images and reports emerging from the liberated camps painted a picture of human depravity that defied comprehension. Emaciated prisoners, mass graves, and the chilling efficiency of the extermination machinery laid bare the systematic attempt to eradicate entire populations. The evidence was undeniable, a testament to the industrial-scale cruelty that had been perpetrated under the guise of ideology. The world's initial reaction was one of disbelief. How could such horrors have occurred, seemingly unnoticed and unchecked, in the heart of Europe? The stories of survivors, once they began to find their voices, added personal narratives to the stark images, lending a visceral reality to the statistics. Each testimony was a thread in the tapestry of horror, revealing not just the scale of the atrocities, but the individual acts of cruelty and suffering that constituted it. As the details of the Holocaust came to light, the horror it inspired was accompanied by a profound sense of guilt and failure. For many, the revelations raised uncomfortable questions about the role of bystanders, about the actions that could have been taken but were not, about the warnings that were ignored. The realization that such evil had been allowed to flourish, that it had been met with indifference or disbelief by the international community, was a source of shame and regret. This period of revelation was also a time of mourning, a mourning not just for the lives lost, but for the innocence shattered. The discovery of the concentration camps and the full scope of the Nazi atrocities marked the end of any lingering illusions about the nature of human capacity for evil. The Holocaust stood as a stark reminder of the depths to which humanity could sink, of the need for vigilance against hatred and bigotry. The world's horror at the revelations was matched by a determination to seek justice for the victims. The Nuremberg trials and other legal proceedings sought to hold the architects of the Holocaust accountable for their crimes, to establish a record of what had occurred, and to lay the groundwork for a system of international law that could prevent future atrocities. These efforts, though crucial, were also an acknowledgement that no verdict could fully atone for the suffering inflicted, that the scars of the Holocaust would endure across generations. In the aftermath of the Holocaust's revelations, there was also a push for remembrance and education, a recognition that the only safeguard against a repeat of such horrors was to keep the memory of what had occurred alive. Memorials were erected, museums were founded, and Holocaust education became an integral part of curriculums around the world. The stories of survivors were recorded, their testimonies serving as a permanent reminder of the consequences of hatred and intolerance. The unveiling of the Nazi atrocities to the world was a watershed moment in history, a grim testament to the potential for evil, but also a call to action. It was a reminder of the need for vigilance, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to human rights and dignity. The horror that greeted the revelations of the Holocaust spurred a global conversation about ethics, responsibility, and the importance of standing against oppression, a conversation that continues to this day. In the years following the liberation of the concentration camps and the end of World War II, the survivors of the Holocaust, bearing the weight of their memories, embarked on the arduous journey of rebuilding their lives. The mystic, whose spiritual leadership had provided a beacon of hope in one of the darkest chapters of human history, left a legacy that would endure far beyond his physical presence. His teachings, the rituals he performed, and the sense of unity he fostered among the prisoners became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of faith to sustain hope in the face of unimaginable horror. The survivors, scattered across the globe, carried with them not just the scars of their experiences, but also the lessons they had learned from the mystic. They spoke of his courage, his unwavering faith, and his ultimate sacrifice, sharing the story with their children and grandchildren, ensuring that the memory of his spirit and the values he embodied would not be forgotten. As the world moved forward from the atrocities of the Holocaust, the revelations of the Nazi regime's crimes against humanity served as a catalyst for change. The horror and guilt that the international community felt upon confronting the full extent of the Holocaust's brutality led to significant advancements in human rights legislation, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the establishment of mechanisms designed to prevent such atrocities from occurring again. The mystic's legacy, however, extended beyond the political and legal changes that followed the war. It lived on in the hearts and minds of those he touched, a guiding light in their ongoing journey towards healing. His belief in the power of unity and the sanctity of each human spirit inspired not only the survivors, but also future generations to strive for a world characterized by tolerance, compassion, and justice. Memorials and museums dedicated to the memory of the Holocaust were erected around the world, serving as stark reminders of the past and as educational tools to combat hatred and bigotry. The mystic story, alongside those of countless others who suffered under the Nazi regime, was featured in many of these institutions, his life and sacrifice honored as an example of the profound impact one individual can have on the lives of many. As the years turned into decades, the survivors began to pass away, taking with them the first-hand accounts of the horrors they endured. Yet, the legacy of the mystic and the lessons of the Holocaust remained as vital as ever. New generations, armed with the stories of the past, continued the work of their predecessors, advocating for peace, human rights, and the dignity of all peoples. The mystic sacrifice, made in the darkest of times, became a beacon of hope not just for those who experienced the horrors of the concentration camp, but for all who believe in the possibility of light amidst darkness. His story, a blend of faith, resilience, and the power of the human spirit, serves as a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming evil, there is always the potential for goodness, for unity, and for redemption. In the epilogue of this tragic chapter of human history, the legacy of the mystic and the lessons of the Holocaust continue to resonate, a call to remember, to learn, and to ensure that such darkness never prevails again. The spirit of the mystic, and of all those who stood against tyranny with courage and faith, inspires ongoing efforts to create a world marked not by the divisions of the past, but by a shared commitment to a brighter, more inclusive future.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the video. We highly recommend you watch the next video here. Oops. I'm waiting for you to click. Yes, you've clicked. Happy watching.